So let's say that I have a function. It can be f of x is equal to x squared. Okay, and we're going to look at our domain over here on the left, and we'll look at our range over here on the right. Now let's take a couple of domain values. We'll look at what happens if I put -1 in, a 0, a 1, and a 2. Okay, so we'll just look at that as our domain. Okay, and we're going to come over here and we're going to map to our range, and let's see what happens. Well, -1, that is going to map to, well, -1 squared. Okay, so -1 squared is just 1, so that's going to map to 1 in my range. 0 squared is just 0. Okay, so if I put 0 into my function, I just get 0 squared, which is 0. 1 though, where's 1 going to go? Well, 1 squared is also going to go to 1. So we're going to see this one also going to the same range output as -1. Okay, and 2, well, that would go across to 4 because 2 squared is 4. So what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing multiple values in my domain, namely in this case -1 and 1. So I'm seeing many of my domain values mapping across to the one singular range value. Okay, so I would call this a many-to-one function. Okay, so if we were to label what type of function this is, we would say that this is many-to-one. Okay, so that's how we can tell if we've got a many-to-one function. Let's have a look at another one. Okay, so we'll come down here. Let's say now that we've got f of x is equal to, let's say it's 2x plus 1, okay? Well, again, let's take my domain on the left here, and I'll take my, we'll take my range over here on the right. Let's pick a few domain values, okay? I'm going to pick -1, 0, 1, and 2 this time, okay? So they're going to be my domain or my input, and I'm going to map them across to a range. So if I start with -1, if I put -1 into my function, so f of -1, well, what do? I get 2 lots of -1 plus 1, okay? So I get -2 plus 1, which is just -1. Okay, so that would map to -1 in my range. You can continue this, okay? If I put a 0 in, that's going to map me over to 1. If I put a 1 in, that's going to map me to 3. And if I put a 2 in, that will map me across to 5. In fact, what I see here is that for every domain value is going to a different range value, okay? And that's going to be the same no matter how many inputs I choose, whether I chose to do, you know, -2, -3, -4, okay? Or I chose to come further down this end and I did 3, 4, 5, or 6, okay? Each range value here only is ever going to have one domain value that can go across to it, okay? Different to the one before where we saw over here, remember we saw our -1 and our 1 both mapping to our singular thing in the range. Down here, we're only ever going to see one domain value mapping to a one singular range value. So we would call this a one-to-one function. Okay, so we've got only one ever domain maps to one singular range. So this is what we would call a one-to-one function. You can see all of these arrows, okay, are only ever going to one singular point, okay, and each one is unique. So that is a one-to-one function. Let's have a look at one more example. Let's say that I've got a domain now, okay, and this will be my domain here. And let's say that I've got the numbers -1, 0, 1, and 2, okay. And over here, I've got a range, okay, which is like my output, remember. And my range, I don't know, it might be 5, 6, 7, and 8. And let's say that, for example, my number 1, okay, it maps to 5. My number 0 maps to 6. My number 1, however, that's going to map to both 6 and 7, okay, and 2 is mapping across to 8. So what do we see here? Well, we are seeing specifically that there is this one domain value, so 1 here, it maps to multiple range values. So that's a one-to-many. Okay, and if we see one-to-many, then we are no longer dealing with a function. Okay, so if we are looking at a one-to-many situation, this is what we would call a relationship. Okay, in as much that we are now no longer dealing with a function anymore. This is now a relationship. So we've got our many-to-one functions, we've got our one-to-one functions, and we have our one-to-many relationships. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at these graphically. So we'll come down here. So what I've done here is if we go back right to the start of the video, okay, I've actually plotted here for us f of x is equal to x squared, okay, so that first function that we looked at. Now remember, we determined by using our domain and our range boxes, okay, we determined this to be a many-to-one function, okay, and we can see that happening because, for example, if we look here at 2, okay, 2 in our domain is mapping up to 4 in our range, okay, and also -2 is also mapping to 4 in our range, okay. So we are seeing many domain values mapping to the same or one range value, okay. So we can instantly see there graphically that we are dealing with what we call a many-to-one function. Okay, now another way graphically to quickly determine whether we've got a function, a one-to-one function, or a many-to-one function, or whether we've got a relationship, okay, is to use what we call the vertical line test. So let's start off. I want to ask the question, do I have a function? Okay, so is the thing that I've got a function? And this all comes down to whether it passes what we call the vertical line test. So if we get a ruler out, okay, and we start with a vertical line, and we just move from the left of the page all the way across to the right of the page, and you'll see that my ruler or my line is only ever touching my red curve at one point, okay? So if I hold it here, for example, I'm only ever intersecting it at that point there, okay, just on the left there. And if I continue still here, I'm only ever touching it at one point. Still, I'm only ever touching this thing at one point, okay? The whole way across from left to right. So if it passes, so to determine whether it's a function, we do what we call the vertical line test. Okay, now if it passes the vertical line test, which in this case, it does, okay? If it passes the vertical line test, then we have a function. If it were to fail the vertical line test, and we'll see an example of that later on, then we do not have a function. Okay, so in this case, we'll do a sad face for that one actually. So no function, okay. Now in this case, we do have a function because we passed the vertical line test, okay, we just proved that then. However, remember there's two different types of functions. We can deal with what we call the many-to-one function or the one-to-one function. Okay, so then what we do is we come down here and we do what we call the horizontal line test. So we take our ruler on our page and we make it horizontal. And we start from the top and we just go down to the bottom. Now we can see here at this particular point, we're intersecting the red curve 2 times, one on the left there and one on the right. In fact, also here we're intersecting it 2 times. Okay, so because we're cutting our function twice here with the horizontal line test, that means that we have a many-to-one function. So we failed the horizontal line test. So if we fail it, then we've got what we call a many-to-one function. And that is the current situation that we're in because we just failed the horizontal line test. Okay, if we were to have passed the horizontal line test, then we would have what we call a one-to-one function. Okay, so hopefully that's making some sense. We're going to do another one now where we're going to look at our linear one, our 2x plus 1. Okay, so here we'll swap our graph over. So here I've actually plotted our y equals 2x plus 1. Okay, remember we dealt with that just a moment ago. Okay, and we're going to determine graphically whether this is a function and specifically if it is a function, what type of function it is. Okay, so remember if we want to work out if it's a function, we're going to start with what we call the vertical line test. So we get a ruler out, okay, and we have our vertical line and we have to check that it only ever touches our red line once or our graph once, okay, and we can see here it's only ever touching once, and as we move this vertical line across the page, we're only ever touching the red line once. So we have passed the vertical line test, which means that we have a function, okay, which is good. Now, we need to work out what type of function it is. So we're going to do our horizontal line test. So we get our ruler out and we make it horizontal. Okay, and we check again and we can see that we're only ever touching our red line at one point. Okay, so we can see at all of these times on our horizontal line test, we're only ever touching our red line once. Okay, so we have passed the horizontal line test. So we're in this space, which means we have a one-to-one function, which is exactly what we came up with just before. So we see that we have this is a one-to-one function in this case. Okay, we'll look at one more example now. So here we've got a circle, okay, and we want to try and determine whether this is a function or not, okay, and if it is, specifically whether it is one-to-one or many-to-one. Okay, so first of all, if we want to find out whether it's a function, immediately we do the vertical line test, okay, so if we get our ruler out and we look to do our vertical line test, so we start with the vertical line, well, we can see that here, for example, we're actually touching our red circle at 2 points there. Okay, and you can see that happens many times. Okay, it's only got to happen once for it to fail the vertical line test, but it's happening a lot of the time here and here, for example. Okay, so we've failed the vertical line test because we are touching our circle at more than 1 point. Okay, so we are in this situation here. So we do not have a function. Okay, which means we have a relationship, and specifically we have what we call a one-to-many relationship. Okay, so we've actually got a one-to-many relationship here. Okay, and we can see why this is a one-to-many relationship, because if I do it in a blue pen, we can see that we have our one domain value here mapping to multiple range values, namely there and there. Okay, and we can see that happening a lot of the time. Our domain value here, for example, is mapping to multiple range values there and down here. Okay, so we have our one-to-many relationship and we have failed the vertical line test there.